Who likes chocolate? No, raise your hand. That's right. All right. Because the chocolate industry provides vision beyond the bottom line, where businesses create an environment in which both shareholders and society both benefit. You see, more than 70% of the world's cocoa, that's a key ingredient in chocolate, is grown in Western Africa, especially in the Ivory Coast. In fact, 1.4 million people in this area grow cocoa on small family farms. Wow. It was about 5 years ago now, and I was consulting with a large multinational chocolate company. And Western agricultural scientist Franca was helping me understand what was going on in this region. Franca was a petite, blonde woman, and she traveled the world. She was just back from a trip from Africa to the Ivory Coast. You see, the total amount of cocoa grown in this region had stopped increasing and begun decreasing despite record cocoa prices. And Franca and her colleagues wanted to know why. Franca told me a story of her trip to see Emmanuel's farm. It had been late in the afternoon, and Franca was tired from having visited so many farms previously. So as she was looking at the trees on Emmanuel's farm, she was thinking to herself, don't any of these farmers prune their trees? I mean, growing cocoa pods takes so much of a tree's energy, and these trees' energies they're all used in worthless branches. There's very little cocoa going to be grown here this year. And she was smelling the earthy smell of the cocoa trees, but there was something else. Oh no, not again, not another blue ribbon. Because there, about 5 feet off the ground, was a royal blue satin ribbon. It was delicately and lovingly tied into a bow around the trunk of the tree. But do you know what was underneath that ribbon? It was a dark, stinky fungus that was killing Emmanuel's trees. And that ribbon was Emmanuel's traditional approach for protecting his trees. And it wasn't working. Franca tried to help. She said, Emmanuel, you know that your trees have a fungus. I have a remedy that will help, but it's not a blue ribbon. You need to untie your blue ribbons. No, I don't. This is my farm. My father farmed here and his father before him. I know what I'm doing. Get off my farm. Leave. Franca didn't know how to deal with that anger, so she just looked at Emmanuel. And deep in his eyes, she saw the ghosts of all the people whose failures really stood behind what was going on today. It was the ghosts of Emmanuel's parents and his grandparents who'd valued his child labor more than his education. The ghost of that teacher at school who taught him very little when he'd gone to school, and certainly nothing about how to tend a tree or manage what amounts to a small business. And there were ghosts of dozens of Westerners like Franca herself who'd been well-intentioned, but they'd each had their own cures and remedies for what was going on in the Ivory Coast. And these uncoordinated actions and different-sounding words had simply bred mistrust that had little lasting impact. And they'd simply reinforced Emmanuel's trust for what he did know. Those traditional blue ribbon cures that his parents had taught him. Franca didn't say anything more, but as she was getting into her car to leave, she was thinking to herself, there's nothing more that I can do here alone. Just a few weeks later, the leaders of the Western chocolate world were meeting at an industry convention to discuss what was going on. Franca's manager was at the lead table, and she said, doesn't it seem like we're on unsteady ground? On the one hand, we have demand for chocolate growing around the world, but we have these farmers in the Ivory Coast that are killing their cocoa trees with worthless, traditional cures. We could run short of cocoa. What do you think? Around that table, the colleagues shared their own perspectives and stories. A few told stories about rising chocolate demand, but more were telling stories about farmers in the Ivory Coast. You see, when I think of a farm in the United States, I think of a professionally managed business. But many of these farms in the Ivory Coast, they're more plots of land where a family lives, and they gather the cocoa as a means to survive. there's very little managing going on. The last of the colleagues to speak, the CEO of the smallest chocolate company represented, the youngest person at the table, well, he spoke up and he said, look, if we're going to make the most of the current situation, we need to have vision beyond the bottom line. At this table are represented some of the most amazing capabilities. The Mars Chocolate Company knows cocoa trees. Cargill has relationships with farmers deep inside Africa, and we all have the business capabilities to execute and get things done. What if we work together to execute and get things done for the benefit of society? Now hear me out. We can make a profit with this. We'll have the World Cocoa Foundation bring us together. We call ourselves leaders. That word leadership can be very powerful. We'll come up with our own shared vision of what it means to have a sustainable cocoa and chocolate industry. We'll commit to coordinated actions that will help bring us closer to that vision. You know, the types of things that will have a real meaningful impact on society. Consistent training for the cocoa farmers, and raising the awareness of the families of those farmers of the true cost of child labor. Well, who's in? Who's willing to give it a try? Well, they did try. And such collaboration by business is incredibly powerful. Today, more than 100 businesses across the cocoa and chocolate supply chain collaborate with one another as members of the World Cocoa Foundation to create value for the society in which they compete. You can see a transparent list of all the actions they take. It's on the World Cocoa Foundation website and the websites of many of the member businesses. I mean, these are businesses. They need their customers to know about the good they do for society. And the World Cocoa Foundation itself leads some of the highest profile initiatives. They have Prince Charles leading in the initiative to end deforestation in the Ivory Coast. That's great. But look below the surface. And what do you see? It's the member businesses themselves that are doing the back-breaking work to really change how people are thinking and acting, how society is working. They create collaborations amongst the different members. They get their own not-for-profit organizations to help and to execute. And there's a real impact. When Franca goes back to the Ivory Coast, she finds that the trees are pruned. Many of the children playing on the farms are playing before homework, not work. And many of those blue ribbons have been put away. Franca checked on Emmanuel the other day. He smiled at her, and he said, "This year I got twice the cocoa that I used to." And I've seen pictures of farms where they plant the trees in straight rows. They use fertilizer and machines. Help me do that. This is what the type of actions that truly benefit society look like. There's no magical overnight transformation. There's a gradual shift from traditional blue ribbon cures to scientific farming, and the benefits to society are growing as this shift is occurring. You know what else is growing? The support for business profit of those businesses putting in the work to get this stuff done. The core of this support is traditional business things. Emmanuel and his colleagues now produce more cocoa to be sold as chocolate around the world, and it's higher quality. Franca sees that she is creating real impact on society. She's more engaged in her work. She's energized. And you and I, we have a wonderful story about chocolate to listen to. Chocolate still is primarily about love and romance. That's right. It's about passion also, but it's also about sustainability. We like that. We buy more. Now, what the World Cocoa Foundation and its members are doing in Western Africa and some other parts of the world is wonderful. But do you know any other part of the world that feels like it's on unsteady ground? That's right. Look around As I show in my book, Drowning in Potential, more than 60% of the American economy is dedicated to industries failing to deliver the basics they would in a successful society. Our World in Data shows that in the United States, we spend twice as much as people in the average developed country on our health, but have the shortest lives in the developed world. Consumer Report says we have 47,000 foods in the average supermarket, but do those foods nourish us? Not really. As Brad Plumer explains, even many of our organic foods of today are less nutritious than their traditionally farmed counterparts of the 1950s, the 1960s. We are surrounded by such basic, fundamental failures, and these failures have their own ghosts that cross American government and culture and technology. The potential profit from solving these problems is immense. But our business leaders will only earn that profit when they lead society with vision beyond the bottom line. As our technology progresses and makes our world more complex, no organization alone controls all of the moving parts necessary to create real and meaningful change. So our visionary leaders of today, they must provide a higher level of leadership that helps us coordinate across organizations to have a chance of solving such problems. You care about what's happening in American society today. You care about the society that we will leave to our children. So what are the blue ribbons around you? What is the fungus that it's hiding? What are you going to do to ensure that we create real and lasting change? If you're in business, energize yourself and your organizations to create meaningful profit. Create a vision of the world in which your shareholders and society both benefit. Share that vision with others. Commit to taking the actions that will take us closer to that vision. And then compete and collaborate as you were before, but in a world in which more value is being created. If you're not in business, energize those who are. Reward those who do provide vision beyond the bottom line. And while we're doing all this energizing and creating and visioning, well, let's all eat a piece of chocolate.